Good morning and welcome to the Cloffice. I hope that you are well this morning. I have continued to read in the book of Ezra, and I was reading in chapter 3, and it's talking about the rebuilding of the temple. And if we look at verse 10 onwards, the rebuilding of the temple starts in verse 7 onwards, and you can go ahead and read that, but we're going to look at verse 10 onwards. It says, "When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments, and with the trumpets, and the Levites with the cymbals, took their place to praise the Lord." So everyone is worshiping and praising the Lord because they've laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord. So with the cymbals, took their places to praise the Lord as prescribed by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. God is so good, and his love endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and the Levites and the family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. So some were shouting for joy and praising and worshiping, and others were just weeping in joy, but weeping aloud because they had seen the former temple. They had been part of the former, and then into the years of captivity, and now again seeing the foundations being laid for the temple to be built again. So that joy and that pain and that grieving all welling up together, they were weeping loudly. The joy was so loud and the weeping was so loud, you couldn't tell between which was which, between the joy shouts and the weeping cries. And so continuing to read, verse 12, "But many of the older priests and the Levites and the families and the heads, they wept aloud when they saw the foundations of the temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because people made so much noise and the sound was heard far away." It is so amazing to comprehend this, seeing the foundations being laid again, being brought out of captivity, being brought out of Babylon, and being able to put together the temple of the Lord so that they could sacrifice and that they could worship the Lord. And just the amazingness of that and all the emotions wrapped up in that. And I found myself the other day seeing this great little clip, and I found myself starting to cry because I felt like the Lord was showing me his heart and how pleased he was. And I was starting to cry, and my kids were there. And they were like, "Mom, you're crying. Why are you crying?" And I was trying to get out to express these are tears of joy because I could feel the heart of the Lord over this situation. And it was good and it was great, but it was just powerful. And sometimes, whether we're women or men or whatever, there's just this overwhelming lining up with the power of God and with the purposes of God that we weep with that as that comes forth. And so here we see the rebuilding of the temple. And when God comes to restore his word, and he spoke his word that this would happen, and when God comes to restore it, just the amazing, first on just a flesh level of, yes, God is answering his word, and the overwhelmingness of that. But there's also something so much greater and so much more. And it reminds me of our situation in our church. See, our church is in this building on these grounds that were purposed for the purposes of God 40 years ago. And then things happened, and people sinned, and wrong things happened, and all sorts of things happened. And it went the way of all things. But the Lord had purposed this ground for his purposes. And so this Sunday marks 5 years of our church being in this building on these grounds. And we know without a shadow of a doubt that the Lord wants to restore what he has spoken, what he has purposed for these grounds, for this land to be used for his purposes and for his plan. So this year we are celebrating, although our church is 12 years old, we are celebrating 5 years of being on this ground in this building and fulfilling the purposes of God. And the Lord is using us to restore what he has promised and what he has spoken. So we are celebrating the restoration of his purposes and his plans in this land, in this geographical area. So I encourage you, if you are in our area, if you are part of our family, even if you're not and you aren't part of a church, to come on out to Antioch this week and celebrate with us 5 years of being part of the restoration purposes for the glory of God. Have an amazing day, and God bless.